Jeff from the BMW DIY Guy. I am really excited for this project today. So there are a lot of brakes out there you can put on your car, and there's also a lot of options that you could get from BMW depending on how your car was set up. And very frequently you can tell the difference between color, ironically enough. Now if you have an F30 or an F32 like my 435, you could have the gray brakes, which are kind of the standard brakes, or you could have the M Sport package and you'd get the blue brakes, and there's a difference between them. Also, if you have an F80 or an F82, so M3 or M4, what your default brakes were blue. So what that means is when you look at the calipers, they're blue. So what that means is with the gray brakes, you've got 340 millimeter fronts and 330 millimeter rears. The blue or M Sport brakes are 370 on the front and 345 in the back. Also, on the backs, instead of being a single piston caliper setup, they're a double piston caliper setup. So you've got 4 in the front and 2 in the back, which makes a big difference. So not only do you have bigger rotors, you've got a difference in the calipers themselves. So my car had the gray brakes, not the blue ones. I was able to get a set of M Sport brakes off of a donor M4, and I just could not be more excited to put these on my car. So not only are my rotors going to get bigger, but my calipers are going to get bigger. Now, the one other thing I did as well is that very frequently the blue brakes are a little beat up. They're really easy to scrape with your wheels. The paint gets scraped and chipped. They don't look very good. So right after I got them, I actually took them off and got them powder coated red. So that'll match the rest of the red trim in my car. I'm really excited to get this in. Let's get out and take a look at it. But before we do that, one quick reminder before we get out to the car. So whenever you've got your car in the air, now this is a project you can do with a single jack and jack stand really simply. You don't have to have it all off the ground at the same time. But anytime your car is in the air, please be safe. Don't bet your life on a jack with a single hydraulic arm in it that may or may not be any good, right? Best case scenario, if your jack fails, your car's on the ground and it's going to be really hard to get up, you could damage your car. Worst case scenario, it could come down on you. So don't bet your life on this, okay? So when we get out to the garage, the car is going to be up in the air and the wheels are going to be off. I've already taken my wheels off. So make sure to loosen your lugs when the car's on the ground. So loosen your lugs, and then once it's in the air, you can take your lug nuts out and get it off. That's a 17 millimeter socket, and then you can get your wheels off and you can get to work. So let's get out to the garage, let's get started. All right, so let's get started. So some of the things I'm gonna do, I'm gonna summarize because my main focus of this is the swap out of the calipers and the stainless steel brake lines. So, you know, my rotors are gonna change as well because with the M Performance calipers, they're bigger rotors that need to go with it. So I'll be taking the rotors off as well. But like I said, some of those pieces I'm just gonna summarize and go very quickly instead of piece by piece. You don't have to take your brake pads out. All you have to do is take the 2 big 18 millimeter bolts on the back and your caliper will be free. On the driver's side, you're gonna have the brake wear sensor that's gonna come out through a clip right here, and then there's actually a matching box on this side. It just plugs into the box right there, so you'll unplug that, pull it out of the little hangers here, and your caliper can be off. Now, before you do that, what I'm going to suggest is that you take a 14 millimeter wrench and loosen the hose on the brake line hose that's here, because it's going to be harder to do once it's off. You've got a good grip on it right now, right? So just loosen it a little bit so it'll be loose. Then you can take these big bolts off, and then you can back the hose out of the back of the caliper. I've got a little blue clip, and I'm going to grab it and I'll show it to you. A little blue clip that goes onto the brake line to help keep it from leaking all over the place. I'm going to put some cardboard down so I don't get a little bit of brake fluid all over. But then the other thing that I wanted to show you is I've got a bit of a trick, and it's going to make this a lot easier than other possible changes. So what I've got, and let me grab it, is here's my new brake caliper. And if you notice, it's already all put together, including the hose, which is a big deal. Okay, so I've got my brake pads in, I've got the pins in, and when it's out like this, you have the ability to put these in a lot more easily. You've got, you know, all the space in the world. You're not going to bang up your powder coating, because the other normal way of doing this is when your hose comes down, your hose can't spin, because when your hose comes up and attaches right at the fitting up here, which you can't see right, and I'll change when I show you the fitting, but you rotate your caliper onto the hose. Now, your caliper's big, it's heavy, you can bang it into things. That can be hard to do. But the good news is with this, because of the way your fitting goes up to where the steel brake line comes down, this hose doesn't have to rotate at all. It just fits straight into place, and then you're rotating the fitting into it. So you can actually hang your entire caliper. You can take your existing one off, pull the hose from it, put the cap on it so it's not leaking brake fluid, and then put this one straight on. Use the 18s, put them right back into place, hang it right back into place. If you're on the if you're on the driver's side, you can put your brake wear sensor on, and you're completely good to go. Because then all you're gonna do is just take this and fit it, so there's no twists in the hose. You can make sure it's laid out really nicely, and just fit it straight up into the steel line fitting for your brake line. It makes this so much easier, because trying to rotate your caliper onto your brake line hose is a pain. If you're doing it the traditional way, where this line would be on first, you're going to be leaking brake fluid. You're going to be leaking brake fluid all over your caliper, all over your hands. This is the easiest and quickest way I've found to do this, and much, much easier. So with all of that said, what we're going to do now, like I said, is I'm going to take my old caliper off, 2 18s off the back, loosen the hose, pull it, and I'm going to cap that line, and then I'm going to move the camera, and I'll show you the brake line fitting that's up here in the shadows right now on the camera, and I'll show you that fitting. It's going to be an 11 millimeter and a 17 millimeter, and we're going to take that off, and we're going to be really good to go really, really quickly. So once I have this off, I'm going to also swap out my rotor as well. So take this off, swap to my new larger 370 millimeter rotor, put the new one on, and we're going to be really close to done. This is actually a really quick process if you do all of the work on the new calipers away from your car, away from the rotors, and you won't be banging them into things. So let me get all of that done. And just as a reminder, it's a 6 millimeter Allen bit to take your rotor off. So caliper comes off, rotor comes off, new ones go on. All right, so as you can see, new rotor's on, calipers on, and this is such an easier way of doing this. It really is pretty amazing. Okay, so you've got a fitting on your new hose, which we can kind of sort of see right here, that there's a horse collar when you take your existing hose off. There's a little clip right here back in the back, right directly behind your strut. You're going to take and pull that horse collar up and off, and then the fitting on your original hose, which is right there that you can see, that fitting will pop up and come free. As you can see, I've got my little clip here on the end of my brake line, so it's really not leaking, which is nice. So I get the minimum amount of brake fluid all over the place, which is a great deal. Just a reminder, brake fluid is caustic, it's bad for your paint, it's going to be bad for your rotors or your calipers, especially if it's powder coated, that sort of thing. So just do your best to try to limit how much brake fluid gets all over. So now you've got this fitting right here. You've got a 17 millimeter fitting on your brake line that comes up, and you're going to use a 17 millimeter to just hold it. You don't have to turn or twist at all. Then at the top, there's an 11 millimeter fitting that fits into the hose. So you'll use your 11 millimeter to loosen, and then this hose will drop away. Now, I've already fed my new line in place, right? So it's not in the fitting behind my shock yet, but it can be, which is nice. I can fit that into place, put the horse collar back down over the top of it, hold it into place. Then all I have to do is, as soon as this is pulled off, is slide the end of the new hose up, just bang, slide it up, fit the fitting right back in, use the 11 millimeter, screw it in tight, and then again, you will have leaked as little as possible. And it is so much easier than trying to put the brake line on first and then rotate your caliper into the brake line. You can't twist your brake line, that'll twist it. It can be really hard if you're having a hard time getting the brake line fitting into the back of your caliper. That can be really hard to do while you're leaking brake fluid all over the place and generally just making a mess. So assembling your new brake calipers first, putting them all together, getting the hoses on is really the fast way to do it. I also think that even if you were using and swapping to existing calipers for stainless steel brake lines, you could do the same thing. And if I was ever going to do that on another F30 or F32 or whatever, I would do the same thing. I would actually just pull the whole caliper and have it off, and repeat the same process. I'd pull the caliper off, I'd put the new stainless steel line on the caliper and then feed it back into place and do the exact same process. I think that's going to be a lot simpler and a lot easier. So my caliper is all assembled. I didn't walk through that in detail because I've got my brake pad change video where you can see, but it's super simple. Just brake pads slide in, make sure to have brake grease on them, put the pins in, put the little retainer clip on the top, and so on. New rotors on, which is great. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to secure the new brake line into this little clip right here. And there's a little pressure fitting that you just, or a little fitting that you just kind of, you can't press it down from above. It just fits straight into the bracket, and then you put the horse collar down over the top of it. This hose can also slide in the fitting too, so you don't have to be as precise on where it goes. So I'm just going to get that fit in, and then I'm going to pull the old brake line, fit the new one in, and tighten it right into place. And I'll show you what that looks like when it's done. All right, here we are. So the line's in. And I really only lost just very little brake fluid because you can make the transfer so quickly. So again, it's an 11 millimeter at the top. The OEM is a 17. These Stoptech stainless steel brake lines are 14s. So just like the 14 on the back, when you put it into your caliper, it's a 14 right here as well. You just tighten it down, hold the 14, tighten the 11 down until it's really tight and firm. It's a steel into a steel connector, so make sure it's tight, but don't kill it, right? Because obviously if you stripped that fitting, because you'd strip the steel line here, if you strip that fitting, that would be really bad, and you'd have to replace, I don't know if you can just replace just the fitting, I don't know. You'd probably have to replace the whole brake line, that stainless steel line, and that would really be a pain. So just don't do it, make sure it's tight. The other thing I do then is I wipe everything down. So it looks a little dark right now just because it's all wiped down, but wipe everything down and then look for leaks. Make sure that you don't have any leaks at all. And then you should be good. And that's that. It's really that simple. It's really not that hard. There's no twists in the line, which is really nice. It's on this fitting in the back with a little horse collar on it, and it can slide in that fitting so you can straighten your line out a little bit, make it as straight as you'd like it. But it really is an easier way of doing it than the old-fashioned way of twisting your caliper onto your brake line, which is really just a hassle. So as you can see, the new rotor's on, new caliper's on, everything's put together, so the front's done. Just make sure, go back through and double check. If you're doing your driver's side, you'll have to do your brake wear sensor, which makes sure that the brake wear sensor is on the brake pad on the inside with the bump on the brake wear sensor facing the brake pad, facing inward towards your rotor. Feed that up around, put it into its clips, put it up into the little box in the corner, right, that's back there. So, and you should be fine there. And then just move to the back. So I'm only going to show one front and one back because it's the same process on both sides. And I wanted to do the passenger back just to show you where the brake wear sensor is on the rear. But as you can see, that's really simple and really not that hard. And if you do it quickly, you actually don't lose a lot of brake fluid. Because I'm changing my calipers entirely, I'm going to do a complete brake fluid flush when we're done. And I'll speak to that briefly as well. As far as bleeding it, because right now I've got tons of air and all kinds of stuff going on. So my car absolutely needs a brake fluid flush completely to get rid of all the air out of the lines and everything else as well. And there's a ton of air in the calipers, of course. There's nothing but air in the calipers right now. So let's move back to the rear and I'll show you that. It's going to be a very similar process, and you'll be surprised how quickly you can get this done. All right, so here we are back in the back. It's going to be a very similar process. Obviously, these are not the sport style, so the two piston, they're single piston, which is why I'm changing them, right? But you don't need to take your brake pads out or deal with this front clip or deal with that because you're just taking the whole thing off. So there's going to be two 16 millimeter bolts holding this in place. So then the whole thing will come off. You're going to do the same thing you did on the front. You're going to take a 14 millimeter and gently loosen the brake line that's on the back of this caliper so it's easier to get off. Obviously you've got your brake wear sensor here that goes down the control arm, loops back up and over through a series of clips, and then plugs into a box over here. So you're going to want to unplug all of that. Once that's all off, you can unscrew your caliper from the brake line, put your little cap on it so it doesn't leak all over the place. Take your rotor off. So again, that's that 6 millimeter right here. Rotor will come off, and then I'm going to put the new one on, and I'll I'll put the new caliper on as well. So reuse the 16 millimeters to put the new caliper on, and then it'll be secure. And the brake line is it's all ready to go. So let me pick it up here. I actually have a little bit of sun today, so hopefully I'm not blowing out the camera too badly here. So look, see, it's completely assembled and ready to go. So you can see it's already got the pins in, it's got its plate in, brake pads are in, brake line is in, which is really nice to be able to get it in. This is a 14 millimeter, which I still need to tighten down. I'm gonna tighten, it's just hand tight right now. My brake sensor's in. So all of this is completely ready to go, and I can just slide it straight into place. So just like I did on the front. So let me get that all done, and I'll use my 14 millimeter while I'm here, right? So just make sure that everything is tightened down and you don't miss anything along the way. Yep, just needed to be snugged down, which I thought. And the other advantage of doing this out and away from your car is, I mean, if you go through all the trouble of powder coating or even the blue paint, right, which is the stock for these, you don't want to, part of this is they look cool. So you don't want to bang them up. And then if you ever wonder, so if you're ever in a situation like me where you have all 4 calipers that are new and you're putting them on, you can tell which side goes to which because the bleeder valve is always at the top, right? So it doesn't matter which side you look at, they can only go on in one orientation, but the bleeder valve has to be at the top. So if the bleeder valve is at the top, you know it's on the correct side. So you can tell that this is the passenger side because you've got the brackets on the inside and the bleeder valve at the top. So let me strip all of that off. I'll show you where the connection for the brake line is because you can tell this is much shorter, so it's just directly back behind right there. Let me show you that, and then this is going to be done. This is really simple. All right, so here's that same fitting again. You're going to do the exact same thing. Here's the end of my stainless steel brake line that is just ready and raring to go. You'll have a 17 to hold the existing line into place, 11 millimeter to back that fitting off, and then drop the hose and immediately fit your new one in place with a 14 millimeter to hold it into place, and then screw that 11 back in. And you're pretty much good to go. Rotor's on, caliper's on, as you can tell. Really super simple and easy way of doing this. So I'm just gonna swap that hose. And like I said, snug, you know, good and tight, but don't over crank it. Don't strip those threads, and then check it for leaks. All right, so, and then we're gonna walk through bleeding the system. All right, so as you can see, it's on, it's tight. I cleaned up the fitting and everything, dried it all off to make sure that it's not leaking, and now it's gonna be time to bleed. So we're gonna bleed our brakes like we've done before, so I'm just gonna summarize it really quickly. I'll show you up from the front. We're gonna drain the brake fluid reservoir of the old fluid, get my pressure bleeder out, all of that, and the bleeding order, because we're currently sitting at the back, at the passenger side rear, so this is actually where we're gonna start. So you always start at the furthest one. So we'll start passenger side rear, driver's side rear, passenger front, driver's front. Now, the 4-pot, these M Performance brakes actually have 2 bleeder valves. They have 1 on each side. Now the backs do not, they only have 1, so you bleed that normally. So you put your bleeder bottle on with the pressure bleeder at the other end, open it up, make sure you don't get any air bubbles or anything else. Let it go until you don't see any air bubbles or anything. On the 2 bleeder calipers, like the fronts now, you bleed the outside one first and then the inside. So let me just show you from the front. I'm gonna summarize it and just kind of move through it quickly because it's pretty straightforward, but we're pretty close to done. All right, so I'm gonna show you what I'm not gonna do. So I put my light right here so you can see, you can just barely see the level of brake fluid, right? So it's actually below the inner filter. So even if I put the end of my bleeder in, or my pump in here, there's nothing for it to suck out, right? So I put my bleeder bottle over here, and normally you suck it out and you get as much out of the reservoir as you can before you get your power bleeder, right? But at this point, it's already lower than what this will get to. So do that first. Obviously, I'm not going to in this case, so I'm going to pull this back out. I'm going to get my power bleeder out, and I'll show you what that looks like all hooked up here. All right, so I've hooked up my power bleeder, screwed into the reservoir here. I got a big bottle of brake fluid, 32-ounce bottle, because I didn't really know how much I was going to go through. It's more than just a typical brake bleed, so I wanted to get a little bit extra just in case I didn't want to run out. And I just got good .4. I didn't go for any of the top tier brands or anything else like that right now. I don't see the need. So you've got a power bleeder here. So you just take this and you're going to pump up your power bleeder and you're going to start to see fluid going in through the hose. And this fluid is super clear. It's like water clear. And you're going to want to pump up to about 50 pounds. So as I look at about 20 pounds, excuse me. All right, so we're just pumping here. It's going to be reflowing the reservoir as well. So there's 20 pounds right there. Now it's okay if you see bubbles in this hose. That's not a big deal because it's flowing down into your reservoir. So I've got about 20 pounds. Now I'm going to go back to the passenger side corner where I've got the bleeder bottle on the bleeder valve right there. You hook the bottle in and then take your 11 millimeter and gently open your bleeder valve. And then it's going to bleed through. So then just watch the hose for your bleeder bottle, and keep in mind, you may go through a lot of this because, at least in my case, my calipers are completely empty. So we're going to go through a lot of brake fluid in this case. So bleed it until you don't have any other bubbles coming out of that hose into your bleeder bottle. All right, so I'm a big fan of the final walkthrough before you button everything up. I haven't put my tires on yet, but that's just kind of a final step. I'll talk through about that in a second. Okay, so my brake fluid reservoir is buttoned up. It's at the maximum line right now. When you have a pressure bleeder like that, you open the bottle side and it'll drain back out a little bit, so top it off if you need to. Now keep in mind, if you're doing a similar project to me, my pistons and all of my calipers are as back as they can be. They were all pushed back completely. So the first time they push out, that's going to suck a little bit out of the reservoir. So the next time I drive it, I'm going to drive it around a little bit to properly bed my brakes, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to check my reservoir yet again, just to make sure that it's at the right level, because I expect it to be a little bit low. Okay, so driver's side front, all buttoned up. The bleeder caps are on, down snug and tight. The brake line on the back of the caliper is tight. I just double check to make sure the brake sensor is all routed back into its little clips and put back into the box with the box closed. I've double checked up there where it connects to the steel line and it's not leaking, no issues there. All well done. Let's move back here to the back. So same thing, I checked my fitting right there, it's completely fine. I checked my one bleeder valve on this, it's fine. I checked the brake hose on the other side of the caliper and it's good to go. Rotor's down and tight. Oh, side note really quick, just take this opportunity to make sure that your brake shield isn't pressed in at all. These are really easy to mash, and I've mashed them pretty good a couple of times. It's really taking a wheel on and off, that sort of thing. So just make sure that it's not bent in at all. Let me walk around the car here. Okay, this side is the same. All buttoned up, good to go. The brake sensor cable is set, all back through all of its clips, all the way back, all the way through the clips in the back and up and underneath right here. Forgive the little bit of shadow up underneath. And then, oh, my socket's still staying there. It's good I checked it, right? So that is a 10 millimeter plastic nut. You pull that off and then you can just peel this piece back because the box you need is directly underneath it right here. Okay, so, and actually see, this is why you do double checks, because the box had popped open. So there we go. So that's all good to go. And I found my socket. I'd wonder where my 10 millimeter went later, right? Especially because BMW loves 10 millimeter. All right, we come up to the front. All good to go. Brake line is set, not twisted. It's not bleeding from the connection, or it's not leaking from the connection. My caps are on. Those are all set. Everything's tight. Brake pads are in and good. Now, one thing I want to note, I overbought on brake fluid, but not by a lot. I would recommend at least 2 32-ounce bottles. I bought 4 just in case. I easily used 2. Because when this is the passenger side rear, I bled this one first and it bubbled longer than I've ever seen before. And I've bled brakes a lot before, but keep in mind, this is dry calipers, new stainless steel brake lines. You've got about the maximum amount of air you're ever going to have in your system. So I went through almost an entire 32-ounce bottle just out this backside until it stopped pushing out air. So I went and bought some more. I overbought. It's not bad to have a little bit of extra because again, I'm gonna have to check, but that should be good to go. All right, so last thing you need to do is just put your wheels on. So be really careful. I know I'm going to be extra careful when I put them on so I don't bang my wheels into my new calipers and scratch them up. It's 106 foot-pounds, so make sure you have a torque wrench that's capable of putting on 106 foot-pounds when you put your wheel lugs on. So put them on snug in the air, then put your car on the ground, and then torque them down to 106 pounds. Bed your brakes. I will have embedded in the video description a great link on how the best instructions to bed your brakes. So take your car out, bed them, be really gentle and be careful at first. And then once you get back, make sure to check your brake fluid that it's at the right levels. All in all, it's all done. All right, all done. So a couple of things you need to do before you go out and drive your car. You need to bed your brakes. So if you look in the description below, you're going to find a link to go to R1 Concepts for their suggestions on how best to bed your brakes. Since these are their rotors and their brake pads, I'm going to defer to them to their instructions. But make sure you do it so your brand new brakes that are bigger and better and stronger and more reliable are going to be exactly what you want them to be. So if you look in the description below, you're going to see all of the tools and information and links for what you need for your stainless steel brake lines, your rotors, your brake pads, and everything else. I am really excited to have this in my car. It really is going to make a difference in performance, but also a difference in appearance, which, you know, is great. I love it when my car looks great. So thank you to R1 Concepts for making such a fantastic product, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video.